This is what happens when you get a colorblind person trying to work a laser pointer. I don't see it anywhere. I can see it on my hand, but I don't. I'm glad you see it because I don't. All right, never mind. So Moreshet is, if you can, obviously it's circled there, but it's right. It's very close to Gath or Got, which is why it's called Moreshet Gath. It's going to be in the very west part of Judah at that particular time. And it's relevant for what's going to end up happening over the course of history. So Micah, he is in the latter half of the 8th century BC, so you're talking about the 700s BC. He lived a long time after this other guy named Micah or Micah, who was also a prophet. So I'll skip this because we're going to talk more in depth about those last 2 points here in a minute. So just for a reminder, these are the 3 kings that he prophesies under, and we'll talk a lot about them and the historical stuff around them tonight. So Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah are the 3 kings that he's going to prophesy during their reign. So his maximum time of prophesying could be 66 years, and the minimum could be 17, as you look at the dates up there. Probably, though, more likely he prophesied for at least 30 years, and probably went until at least 701 BC, which is when Sennacherib is going to invade. All right, so those 3 kings you kind of have to keep in mind, and then these 4 Syrian kings are good to keep in mind if you can remember the names. I know the names are a little bit funny to us. But Tiglath-Pileser III is the Assyrian king that kind of brought Assyria, he made Assyria great again, so to speak. Assyria had kind of dipped on the international scene for a while, and he brought them back to prominence. Then Shalmaneser V follows him, then Sargon II, and then Sennacherib. So, sorry, that's my watch. Okay. So those 4 kings, kind of keep them in. Most of the information is going to center around Tiglath-Pileser III, but the other 3 are going to be relevant. We'll talk more about this war here in a minute. So I think this is kind of about where we left off last week. So the date, Sargon II launched his campaigns against Philistia in 720 and 711. We'll talk more about this in a minute too, but the reason it's significant, if you go back and you look at this map, notice in the white that is Philistia, or the Philistine cities, we might call it. Today that is called what? Yeah, if you haven't been totally under a rock, that is called Palestine today. And the word Palestine actually comes from the word Philistine, okay? They have nothing to do with each other in terms of race, I guess you would say. But the modern day term Palestine comes from the ancient word Philistine, okay? So the area that the Philistines occupied, that is the current thing in the news right now with Palestine, and the cities also, Gaza in the Bible, you got Gaza now, etc. So that same kind of area. But the reason it's important for this particular time frame with Micah is Assyria is going to come in and hit the Philistines first, and then they're going to curve back east towards Judah. So what is one of the very first towns they're going to hit after they go through Philistia and then go back east towards Jerusalem? Well, it's his hometown, okay? His hometown's right there on the border of Philistia and Judah, and so that's why his hometown plays some significance in this. So Sargon is going to launch a campaign against Philistia in 720 and then again in 711. So Micah is going to be concerned about his hometown, probably his relatives that still live there, and so forth. And then later on, Sennacherib is going to launch a major campaign into Judah, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Micah is a contemporary of Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah. He's younger than those three, but he does overlap them. Remember, Amos and Hosea are prophets to Israel, whereas Isaiah and Micah are prophets to Judah. Some people think Micah prophesied out in the countryside while Isaiah prophesied in Jerusalem, but I think most scholars now think Micah actually prophesied in Jerusalem as well, but they just prophesied in different social circles. So Isaiah had access to the royal court and had more access to the king and so forth like that, so he actually could prophesy directly to the people in charge, whereas Micah probably was prophesying just to the average people in Jerusalem. But they did overlap, and a lot of their stuff is happening at the same time. Many of Micah's oracles are not specific to given times, so that's going to be the problem with his book. We know when he prophesied, but we don't know when he said each particular thing. So you can't tie this particular prophecy to this particular historical event because you don't know the exact year that he's saying the stuff that he says. Some things you can kind of infer, but as a whole, it's hard to pin it down to a specific event or time that he's talking about. Okay, but a lot of people assume a lot of his work is in the very end of the 8th century BC. Okay, the only definitive date for Micah's career is actually what is mentioned in Jeremiah. So Jeremiah mentions a particular prophecy that Micah made. Now Jeremiah is going to be much later on after Micah, so this is the prophecy that Micah made had a great impact on the Judean people and on Jeremiah himself. So he references this about 100 years later, okay? But it's a particular oracle he gave during the reign of Hezekiah. So we at least know that that particular oracle happened during King Hezekiah's time. Okay, so let's talk about the international scene, and this is where you'll either love it or you'll fall asleep. So it'll take a while to kind of get some perspective on what's going on. If you don't like a lot of names and history and stuff, you close your eyes for a while and just realize that basically what is happening is a lot of chaos, okay? As I go through all this, you'll realize, man, what a messed up 40 or 50 years, okay? So if you get nothing else out of it, Isaiah and Micah prophesied at a time when there's a lot of chaos happening in Israel and in Judah, okay? And you might see a lot of this and think, man, that sounds pretty similar to today, actually. Okay, so to start off with, we've talked about this before, but Israel and Judah enjoyed long periods of peace and prosperity in the first half of the 8th century BC. So you're talking about kind of the 750s to the 790s of the 8th century BC. And the reason for that, at that particular time, Assyria is weak and Egypt is weak. So if you remember, we talked about this, that the reason Israel and Judah gets faced with these problems over and over is they're sitting between two major world powers. You got Egypt on the west and you got Assyria on the east, and they basically are located directly in the highway between those two world powers. And so anytime one of those world powers decides, hey, I want to exert my dominance over the known world and try to take more control, then they're right in the warpath zone of that particular country trying to branch out. So as a result of that, they're going to constantly be forced, or they're going to constantly be tempted to strike alliances with other countries, which God told them not to do, but they're going to be tempted to do that over and over again. Okay, but for the first half of the 8th century, both Egypt and Assyria are quiet, and that allowed Judah and Israel to prosper. They increased their territory, they became very wealthy, and they were able to engage in a lot of foreign and domestic trade. And they had each country had a king that lived for a very long time that gave them a lot of stability. So for Israel, that was Jeroboam II, and for Judah, that was Uzziah. Okay, But both of those guys die kind of in the mid part of the century. So Jeroboam II dies in 753 BC, and Uzziah of Judah dies in 740 BC. Now, the Uzziah part we'll come back to in a minute. He didn't die until 740, but the last 10 years he didn't really do anything. We'll talk about that in a minute. His son was running the show. And so really around 750, he's kind of off the scene, even though he's still alive. So the latter half of the century is when it gets really chaotic, okay? So after the death of King Jeroboam II, Israel's final 30 years as a nation are chaotic. They had 5 kings in 15 years, 3 of whom were assassinated, and Israel was not strong enough to face the coming threat of Assyria. Okay, the weakening of Israel and Judah coincided with the resurgence of Assyria under Tiglath-Pileser III, who came to the throne in 745. So again, for Israel's purposes, Jeroboam II died in 753, and 8 years later, this Assyrian king rises up. Okay, so Tiglath-Pileser III comes to power 8 years later. Assyria in the past, about a century before, maybe not quite a century before, they had previously come west into this area, the Palestine area. But at that time, really their goal was just to capture territory to get people to pay them tribute money. They weren't really interested in a lot of the other stuff. But this time around, that's not their main goal. Okay, their main goal this time is they want to conquer the lands. They want to get the goods from the lands, the timber, for instance. They want to engage in trade. But really what they're doing is they're trying to make their way to Egypt, and they want to take Egypt over. Okay, so the countries of Judah and Israel and the ones right around them are just happen to be on the path to Egypt. All right, and that's where they're really trying to get. So the first foray in that direction for Tiglath-Pileser III, he took a place called Arpad in 741. And then he took the Aramean state of Hamath in 738. So that's just kind of the beginning of them starting to move west. In the 740s, King Menahem of Israel and King Rezin of Syria started to pay tribute to Assyria. So don't get Syria and Assyria backwards. They're two different places. Syria is still the same place as Syria today. In the 740s, Israel and Syria pay tribute, but Judah does not, okay? And that's going to cause some problems in a few minutes that we'll talk about in a minute. So I suspect Israel and Syria were jealous that Judah wasn't having to pay up any money while they were both having to pay money to Syria, okay? Israel and Syria are frenemies. Sometimes they side together to fight. A lot of times they fight against each other. And so it's kind of a love-hate relationship between those two countries. But as you move forward in time, in 734 BC, Tiglath-Pileser III conducts a campaign into Philistia, which is AKA Palestine, the same place as Palestine today. And he goes against Gaza. And so he defeats those areas. And he puts up a stela. A stela is a marker that they would write stuff on, usually brag about their accomplishments on it. And the stela is at Wadi El Arash, and it marks the extreme western limit of his authority. Okay, and I'll show you where this is in just a second. But the reason that's important is because he cuts off the whole area of Palestine and Israel and all that from Egypt by doing this, okay? So if you take that area, you cut the highway off. Now Egypt doesn't have any access to that area, so they can't send them support to try to rebel against Assyria. All right, so here's a picture. So the dude on the right, that's Tiglath-Pileser III. Let me see if I can actually see this thing. Does anybody see that? Am I the only one who can't see this? All right, anyway, I'll see if this actually works. No. Huh? Oh. Ah, there we go. That's Tiglath-Pileser III. All right, so the thing I'm talking about, this wadi, do you see the word Egypt inside my circle? Go straight up from that and slightly to the right, and you'll see a place called Raphia that's right by the word Judah. Right in that area, there's a river and a water system that supplies the Sinai Peninsula right there, and that's what's called the Wadi El Arush. So what happened is Tiglath-Pileser III made his way all the way down to that place called Raphia right there, and that's where he cut off Egypt being able to go up north into Judah or Palestine. So as you look at this map, what you'll notice, Assyria in the time before Tiglath-Pileser is just that color in the middle. I have no clue what that is, purple maybe. But the area in the middle is the size of the country before he took over, and then the size of the country basically while he's in power, and the next two kings are in power. You see how much bigger the country gets. So he takes over a lot of the known ancient Near East at the time. A couple other things to know. Technically, Assyria and Babylon are two different countries. So Assyria is obviously the darker one. Babylon is the one south right here. The main city in Assyria, the main cities there are on the Tigris River, whereas the main city of Babylon is on the Euphrates River. They're technically two different countries, but at this particular time, Assyria is ruling Babylon, and so Tiglath-Pileser III is actually king of both countries, okay? And the reason that's important, I'm pretty sure I think this is the one. In the Bible, there is a guy named Pul that you'll see, P-U-L, and you'll think he's a different guy than the other ones. What it really is when you're the king of Assyria, you have a particular name for your throne name in Assyria, but then you have a different name for your throne name in Babylon, okay? So Tiglath-Pileser's throne name for Assyria is Tiglath-Pileser III, but his throne name for Babylon is Pul. It's the same guy, okay? So as you're reading the Old Testament, you'll sometimes see him called Tiglath-Pileser III, and other times you'll see him called Pul, and you'll think it's two different dudes. It's not, it's the same guy, okay? So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, so in 742, Menahem dies, and his son Pekahiah becomes king, and he reigns for 2 years, and then he gets assassinated by the head of his military, a guy named Pekah, and Pekah reigns for 20 years. There's a little bit of debate on the exact years, but anyway, 20, we'll go with 20. And so he represents the part of Israel that wants to throw off the Assyrian yoke, so to speak, okay? So you're getting kind of this national pride developing up in Israel that we don't want to be under another authority, we want to revolt against them, and this guy kind of goes along with it. So you're starting to get this turmoil building up in Israel, and to a lesser degree in Judah, but particularly in Israel because they're paying so much tribute to Assyria that they want to get rid of this oppression of Assyria. So in the 740s, King Uzziah is technically still the king of Judah, but you have to go back and read the story. He burned some incense when he wasn't supposed to burn incense. God struck him with leprosy for disobeying. We don't have time to go into that whole story. But anyway, the last 10 years of his life, he had leprosy, so he really couldn't come out and rule. He had to kind of stay hidden. So his son Jotham is technically co-regent, meaning he's co-king with his father, but he's pretty much running the show because his dad has leprosy and he can't really do anything. So even though Uzziah doesn't die till 740, really Jotham is really running the show. From 750 to 740, And then Uzziah finally dies, and Jotham reigns another 8 years solo without his dad being a part of it. So he reigns to 732 BC. He had a lot of accomplishments, including defeating the Ammonites and forcing them to pay tribute. And he probably opened up a trade route for Judah. So things are still going pretty good in Judah, while things are not going well in Israel. Okay, so at this particular time, Israel is paying tribute to Assyria, whereas Judah is not. And Judah is actually going okay right now. All right, so in 735, Ahaz takes over. So Ahaz is Jotham's son. He begins reigning as co-regent with Jotham for 3 years, and then Jotham dies. So then Ahaz becomes king in 732. In 735 BC, the king of Syria, which is Rezin, and the king of Israel, which is Pekah, they decide to put pressure on Ahaz of Judah to join them in a 3-nation revolt against Assyria. Now, remember, Judah and Assyria have no qualms, right? Judah's not paying them any tribute. So why would Judah want to jump into a war with the main player on the scene when they don't have any problems with each other? And so Ahaz tells him, "You're crazy. I'm not joining you in this fight." And so Rezin and Pekah say, "Well, if you're not going to join us, then we'll just fight against you, and we'll take you off the throne. We'll put another guy on the throne who is anti-Assyrian, and we'll get our 3 countries together, and we'll fight against Assyria." Now, the reality is the 3 of them together had no chance of beating Assyria anyway, but they thought they could, okay? So King Ahaz resists, so Rezin and Pekah plan to invade Judah, remove Ahaz from the throne, and put another ruler on the throne. And they had a guy picked out they wanted to put on the throne. At the same time, the Edomites and the Philistines took advantage of the situation, and they took back their land that Judah had conquered. So what's happening is you got a situation now where Judah is getting pressure from 3 different directions, okay? Now remember, Judah has no issues with Assyria right now, but the north of them, you see kingdom of Aram, Damascus, that's Syria, that whatever color that is. And then you got Israel here, and then you drop down, and then you got Judah, and I guess that's red, this thing over here. That's the Philistine territory, and then you got Edom here at the bottom. So what's happening is Syria and Israel want to fight Judah. The Philistines have taken land back from Judah, and Edom is taking land back from Judah. So 3 of the 4 directions are now causing problems for Judah, okay? So if you're king of Judah, which is Ahaz, what in the world do you do? I mean, you're going to be real tempted. Now, what should he do versus what does he do? What he should do is listen to the prophets and read his Bible where it says you don't make alliances with other countries. But we're all human and we do stupid stuff. And as the king of the country, what is the king's primary responsibility as the king? Keep the citizens safe, right? You don't want to be invaded. What also happens in the ancient Near East if a kingdom is taken over? What happens to the king of the fallen kingdom? They get killed, as well as all their kids. And what happens to their wives and concubines? They get taken by the other country and become wives and concubines in that country, okay? So you can see the temptation. You don't want to die. You don't want to see your kids murdered in front of you. You don't want your wives raped by the people coming in. And you don't want your citizens to be tortured by all these different directions. So there's a lot of pressure here, and he's going to cave to the pressure and make a really stupid decision. But I can't say I would have been a whole lot smarter given the situation. So Ahaz is a horrible king, by the way, if you don't recall from the story. He's one of the top 2 worst Judean kings, so he's not a good guy. All right, so he feels pressure from 3 sides, and so he panics. And despite the prophet Isaiah telling him not to do so and instead to trust the Lord, He doesn't listen. So this is what Isaiah told him would actually happen. He said Assyria would sweep on into Judah, it will overflow it, and it will pass through. In other words, Assyria will come through your country, but they're not going to cause you problems. They're just going to move on, okay? So if you just sit back and wait and not panic, Assyria will come through and take care of your problems, these other countries, and they'll just pass through your country on the way to Egypt, and you will be fine. He didn't listen to what Isaiah had to say, and he decided to do something different. All right, so instead of listening, he reaches out to Tiglath-Pileser III and says, I am your servant and your son. Now that is a ancient Near Eastern idiom for I will be your vassal kingdom, okay? So basically he just, without even needing to, Isaiah told him, you don't even need to do this, just sit back, it'll play itself out. He panics and just says, I'll be your vassal state if you protect me. So Assyria is like, well, sure, I'll take your money. I was coming through anyway. What difference does it make? So Ahaz pays tribute to Tiglath-Pileser III, but to pay the money, he had to strip the entirety of the temple and the royal palace of all the gold. He had to take all the gold out of those two places and give all that gold to Assyria. If he'd have just listened to Isaiah, he wouldn't have had to done any of that. So as a result of Ahaz's decision, Judah is never an independent country again for the rest of their time. Okay, so Tiglath-Pileser III accepts King Ahaz's plea. Why not? It's free money. So he becomes a vassal. So Tiglath-Pileser III, he sweeps through the area. He subjects Syria, Israel, and Philistia, those countries that were trying to get Judah to team up with them. He makes it all the way to the Wadi, and he cuts off any possible aid from Egypt. Damascus, which is the capital city of Syria, will fall in 732. King Rezin is killed, and Syria becomes an Assyrian province. Okay. As far as Israel goes, Galilee, which is a part of Israel, is taken, as well as the areas east of the Jordan River. And they're converted into 3 Assyrian provinces known as Karnaim, Ashtaroth, and Gilead. And the western province becomes Megiddo. You probably have heard these terms before. All right, so Syria falls, Israel falls, or part of Israel falls at this point. King Ahaz of Judah was summoned to Damascus to submit to Assyria, so he got humiliated. He had to go up to Syria and basically bow down and say, I will be your vassal. But he does this horribly foolish thing while he's in Damascus. He's at the temple in Damascus, which is obviously a pagan temple, and he sees this altar that he likes when he's in the pagan temple. And so he tells his people, hey, make a copy of that and stick it in our temple and move our current altar off to the side, and we'll use this as our main altar going forward. Bad idea. Ahaz introduces the pagan cults into Jerusalem. He sacrifices his own son, and he burns incense on the high places, and he's remembered as one of the worst kings in the history of Judah. All right, going back up to Israel, Hoshea becomes king after Pekah is removed. Hoshea is kind of a puppet king for Assyria now that Israel is a vassal state. He initially pays tribute to Assyria. However, after Tiglath-Pileser III dies in 727, he decides to stop paying tribute once Shalmaneser V takes over. Instead of paying the money to Assyria, he keeps the money and he tries to form an alliance with Egypt, which was also very foolish. In response, as you would have guessed, Shalmaneser V did not like that. He did not like Hoshea's insubordinates and not sending the money. So he comes into Israel and lays siege to the capital city, which is Samaria. Samaria falls in 722 or 721. And it's hard to know if it's Shalmaneser V or Sargon II that actually takes it over, because Shalmaneser V dies during that siege time. A lot of sources say that he died before the siege ended and Sargon II actually finished the job. Either way, it doesn't matter. Syria takes Israel. Israel's done. They're never part of history again. So Assyria takes 27,290 of the upper class citizens of Israel takes them captive back to Assyria. And then what they do instead is they bring foreigners from other parts of the Assyrian Empire and they dump them into Israel to mix the people together, okay? And that was the typical way Assyria did it. They did it that way to demoralize the people so they would not revolt against them. The Israelites who remained in Israel, however, did continue to worship the Lord. However, the foreigners that got moved into the area brought their own pagan gods with them, so now you got a multitude of religions all in the same area. Eventually, Assyria did allow a Jewish priest to return to Bethel to teach the foreigners how you should be a Jew. Probably didn't go over great, but anyway. Israel never existed as a nation again, and those taken to Assyria became lost to history. Nobody really knows what happened to them other than they probably got assimilated into the culture that they were a part of. And in 715, Sargon II does import Arabs into Samaria, okay? So you got a mixing of the people. All right, so this just shows the deportation maps from Israel into different parts of Assyria. You can see that Samaria is right there. And so the people of Israel and the city of Samaria get sent all over the Assyrian Empire, okay? All right, okay. In 720, so now Israel has fallen, it's completely gone. Judah's still on the scene though. In 720, tensions again begin to arise in Palestine again. Egypt begins to renew their interest in the Palestinian area, and together they decide they're going to fight against Assyria. This becomes Assyria's first encounter with Egypt, and Assyria wins, and they take about 9,000 people captive. Up to this point, though, so far, Judah has basically stayed out of trouble, other than Ahaz agreeing to be a vassal and give them money, but they've otherwise not been in any conflict, and they've pretty much sat on the sidelines safely. But Hezekiah, he reigns as co-regent with his father, which is Ahaz, for 12 years, and then Ahaz is going to die in 715, and Hezekiah becomes king. In 713 to 711, Judah is going to join Edom and Moab in an anti-Assyrian uprising at Ashdod. Ashdod is one of the Palestinian cities. And the king of Ashdod quit paying tribute to Assyria, so as you can imagine, that's going to get Assyria's attention when the money's not coming back. So there's also evidence to suggest Egypt is kind of the one behind the scenes, fueling the fire, getting them to revolt. So Sargon is going to send his commander there to squash the revolt. And I know the second bell just rang. Sargon II is going to die in battle in 705, and then he's going to get replaced by Sennacherib, who's the last of those four kings that we were talking about. Now, when Sennacherib, and I'll stop after this slide. When Sennacherib first becomes king, he's got a lot of problems back home over in the east. So he kind of quits paying attention to what's happening in the west. So all the countries in the west, the Philistine or Palestinian area, Judah, Egypt, Ammon, Moab, Edom, all those countries, they kind of start realizing that Assyria is not paying attention to us. Maybe now's the time we can revolt, and so forth. So I'll kind of leave it as a cliffhanger. What's Sennacherib going to do? So he's got some situation back home. He's got to get settled first. I'll tell you, he settles his issues back home, sort of, and then he's going to eventually turn back and look at what's going back here at the west. But next week we'll look at how these countries start to they start to get kind of a national sense of pride. We need to revolt against this. We need to kind of go back to our roots and so forth. So we'll look at that next week. Does anybody have any questions? I know it's a lot of information to take in. Basically, the key thing is there's a lot of chaos happening in a short window of time, a lot of wars, a lot of fighting, a lot of countries falling apart. And so Israel falls apart, and Judah is threatened to be falling apart if they don't listen to Micah and Isaiah and what some of the prophets are telling them. Any questions? All right. We'll see you guys next week. Oh, remember to come down front if you want to help with Guy Baker's funeral meal.